Our first speaker is Moumne. She is a graphic designer and a co-founder of Studio Safar, Journal Safar, and Hayya Magazine, of which is also the editor-in-chief. One thing I want you to know about her is that she is at the center of social, political, and intersectional feminist discourses in design and publishing from Beirut to Montreal. And I'm super honored to have you today as part of this series. I'm really excited to learn from you and for you to share all your impactful work and knowledge with us.
Thank you so much, Dina, for that introduction. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm so happy to open the series of talks for Hello Departures. This is a very, very exciting initiative, so thank you. I'm gonna take you guys through, through the world of Safar, be it the studio or the magazine, and there will be some interruptions with a few videos here and there. Studio Safar is a design agency and a publisher that was established in 2012 with offices in Beirut and now Jojak in Montreal.
It started with an obsession for print. Two hoarders, a space to collaborate, to experiment, to play, to share, to learn, to publish, to make space, to rest, to think, and to fight.
I'm going to start off with 4 words and their definitions, and the purpose of this is not to enlighten you with the words and their definitions. It's just to bring back to the front these words that I find very important in our practice, both in the conception of our work and in conversations that take place with clients from around the world, especially with the rise of the recent interest in hiring designers from the Global South. So the first word is fetishize, and to fetishize is to have an excessive and irrational commitment, devotion to, or obsession with something. To romanticize is to deal with or to describe in an idealized or unrealistic fashion, to make something seem better or more appealing than it really is. To exoticize is to portray someone or something unfamiliar as exotic or unusual, so to romanticize or to glamorize something. And finally, pastiche, an artistic work in a style that imitates that of another work, artist, or period. Unlike with most magazine studio timelines, our design studio happened to come before the magazine. So usually what happens with studios that are both a studio and a magazine, like Apartamento magazine is also Apartamento Studios. Usually the magazine is created, it does really well. The people behind the magazine start to get commissioned to do art direction work, design work, communication work. And once they get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commissions, they turn it into a studio. So then there becomes a studio that operates on a commission basis, in addition to outputting the product, which is the magazine. In our case, the reverse happened. We started the design agency, and then the design agency decided to start publishing a magazine. The studio adopts an experimental approach to design, evoked by its name. Safar is concerned with notions of communication across cultural and linguistic barriers. Most of the work we do services the extended cultural sector and is engaged in social and political discourse. Growing up, studying, and then working and producing from Beirut, we felt like there has always been a big gap in writing about regional design and visual culture. There were conversations and disputes to be had, as well as opinions and discoveries to be made.
من قتل ماريلين على خشبة مسرح مونو مع مروة خليل وريا حيدر. إخراج نديم دعيبس من 7 إلى 18 كانون الأول. للحجز 01 421 875.
Bored by a utilitarian problem-solving approach to design, we naturally steered towards the arts. Post-war Beirut had seemed like a big laboratory of experimentation in every discipline, and collaborations with musicians, thinkers, and performers defined the period before starting Studio Safar. Conceiving the studio put us face-to-face with the urgent questions we had been obsessing over: identity, multilingualism, and nostalgia. We essentially felt an urge to negotiate a relationship with a complex and chaotic baggage of visual culture. And this all started with our name. We wanted an Arabic word, and at the time, almost all design studios in Beirut had English names. We chose Safar, which is Arabic for travel, to convey notions of exchange and communication across physical and linguistic barriers. American and European design history and thinking have definitely shaped our understanding of the field of design. And while we may think this is a result of globalization, a more accurate term for this is, in fact, colonialism. Colonialism starts with language and extends to all fields of cultural production, from fashion to architecture and, of course, graphic design. And we see this quite vividly in academia. These are, just some of the books that we had to read while we were students in a university in Beirut. In the Arab region, we had close to no documentation of our own visual culture with regards to printed matter and graphic design specifically. And when we talk about the hegemony and the heavy influence of American and European design history and thinking specifically in academia, we mean the courses given and the works produced. This is a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, there's something exciting and new about the assemblage of influences and references. But on the other hand, there's definitely a partial erasure of local conventions and representation. Throughout our career, we came across, and education, in fact, we came across this publication that was published in Cairo in the late 70s, early 80s by a well-known to us now, graphic designer and illustrator called Muhyiddin al-Labbad. He passed away a few years ago. And he was quite popular in, he was quite well known for the works he did with children's books. So he published a lot of children's books during an era where most of the Arabic books we got were translated from European and American books. So we would get any classic folktale of children's books, it would be brought into the region, translated and flipped so that it reads from Arabic to English, and then it would be sold in the market in the Arab region, whether it's Lebanon or the neighboring countries. This person actually was one of the first people to create a publishing house that very popularly produced and distributed children's books that were written by people from the region and illustrated by people from the region. And so the context of these stories took a lot of cues from the culture. This was a magazine, or actually, in fact, I should say periodical. So this was a periodical called Nazar, which means vision in Arabic. And it was, I think there were 4 volumes that were printed or published. They're very rare to find. But these were, in fact, journals that documented visual culture in the region. It was completely published in Arabic, and it addressed things such as the direction of comic books from English to Arabic, Arabic letter forms, calligraphy, symbolism, folk tales, the skin color, lots of topics that were not at all ever addressed during that era. And in fact, not even after this was published were these topics ever addressed. And when we came across this, like a light bulb lit in our heads, owing to the absence of local institutional archives that specialize in prints and or visual and material culture, we rely on the personal collections and archives of our friends and colleagues to look back and retract anything that we can find about our past. Some of them come in the form of Instagram accounts like Hayya Studio. This is an old screenshot, so this is not what it looks like today, but one of them is Hayya Studio, who works very actively on archiving printed ephemera from the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. But for the very first time in 2020, an academic book on the history of Arabic graphic design was published in Cairo by Haytham Nawar and Bahia Shahab. The book is called A History of Arab Graphic Design. And this was really very exciting for us because nobody had compiled historical references of specifically graphic design and not artists. We have a lot of books kind of documenting artists from the region, but we don't have any that's specifically documenting graphic design. And especially because graphic design is a new field, is a new industry, we were really excited about this. But it doesn't just start with the history of Arabic graphic design. A lot of efforts have been made in documenting and publishing different aspects of design and visual culture throughout the region. Some of them are about photographers, some of them about calligraphers, designers, journalists, et cetera, and there are many, many, many more that are getting published today. One of our missions is to shift the attention of the design narrative from its fixation on the global north and to look inwards and backwards at history. And if we were to agree to recognize design as an active agent in cultural production, a question we often ask ourselves is how can we use the tools we have as designers to present more useful, lasting, and democratic forms of communication?
А я що робить? А що, мені дивиться, як вона їсть шоколад, я теж може хочу шоколад, блін. Задумала, блін, мені дуже шоколад. Я дуже хочу шоколад.
The first years carried equal measures of excitement and disappointment. We were the new kids on the block and it felt good. Clients wanted to take risks with us, and the thrill of the new was real. We were also sometimes stupid and aimless. We understood the value of collective thinking and doing, and forged our very own studio culture. Some people became forever collaborators and friends, main actors in the studio's story. We learned about things we never thought were prerequisites for running a design studio. Work led us to the nooks of the city that collectively became our home. We gave it our all. It was a strange and exciting time to be in Beirut, right before the city's freefall. Work, pleasure, and politics collided.
In terms of scope of work, we do everything a graphic design and art direction agency does, in addition to publishing our own design and visual culture magazine. So we do, identity strategy, poster design, communication strategies, packaging, website design, exhibition design, et cetera, et cetera. And throughout the videos, you'll see snippets of our work. I mean, all of this is our work. I'm just not going to stop and talk about each one of them. I'm going to give a little trigger warning here before I go through the next spreads. This is about the explosion that hit Beirut in August 2020. So I would skip the next 5 minutes or so if anyone would have a hard time seeing footage of or images of the explosion. August 4th, 2020 is when an explosion hit Beirut and leveled a part of the city. But during this period, I mean, it had been already quite a tumultuous period for Beirut or for Lebanon, following the uprising that had started in 2019, with the banking crisis, the economic crisis, and COVID. The country was really, really in distress and still is. And this was just the cherry on top, the explosion. This is our street in Jamaica. This is what the street looked like the day after the explosion. And I tend to have a hard time talking about the situation in Lebanon. So what I do instead is I've collected some screenshots from Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and I'm just going to read from that. This is a post on Twitter. Lebanon has been dealing since last year with rampant fires, brutal opposition from government to the popular uprising, a collapsed economy in free fall, informal capital controls on banks, essentially meaning everyone lost their money. More than half the country is under the line of poverty, exchange rates of the USD soaring, with the minimum wage dropping from $450 to $80 a month. It's much, much less now. COVID numbers rising and putting a strain on a very fragile healthcare system, and now the explosion that leveled most of the city. These are just some images from people during the protests. This is the Facebook, what do you call, status. Amid the unspeakable catastrophe that unfolded in Beirut, new COVID-19 cases have skyrocketed in the past few days. And since we've been pushed to such extreme conditions of unlivability, we're now strictly fearing contagion because it either means we'll be excluded for weeks from lending out a hand to the hundreds of thousands who've lost their homes, or that we'll find ourselves with no safe space to quarantine, or even that, God forbid, we require hospitalization. We will not be able to find available rooms in our destroyed medical facilities because torn limbs always trump shortness of breath. The Lebanese state and its apparatuses did warn us about a global pandemic, but they failed to inform us that, in the meantime, it was readying itself to wipe us all out with a nuclear blast. This is a screenshot from an Instagram story. This was a screenshot posted on the first protest we did after the blast. I also just want to mention that we lost our studio during the blast and we were all inside the space. So this screenshot says, marks the location of the Beirut explosion, like where the site happened, and then the downtown area where the protest was happening. And this person said, today is the real explosion. See you at 5. This is another Facebook status. Today, the whole world is watching. We need a member of every single household in Lebanon in the streets today and tomorrow and after. We clean the rubble, we raise the funds, we make the policies, we save each other, we make the country, and the next step is we are the government. This was the turnout for the protest that that we attended the right after the explosion hit. This protest was met with a lot of brutality by the government. Even after the explosion, a lot of people were sent to the hospital because they were fired at with rubber bullets by the government. Design and politics go hand in hand. I mean, after all of that, how could it not? How can we be graphic designers living in a city and just producing work, commissioned work for Spotify and for, I don't know, whatever? How can we not make politics and design go hand in hand? As designers, we've been trained and encouraged to apply our skills and imagination to sell inessential things at best, like cigarettes and sneakers and credit cards and recreational vehicles, but never to speak up or tackle politics, mental health, environmental and social crises, and the list goes on and on. This was the foreword in one of the issues of the magazine that we published during the pandemic. It reads, "Pandemics, policy, and economics try to dampen the fact that we have a voice, and yes, it will be heard." Because of the crisis, we also couldn't access our bank accounts. So any transfers that would come into Lebanon were blocked. We had a really hard time paying ourselves and salaries and paying rent and whatnot. And at some point, we realized that the banks were also withdrawing an unreasonable amount of money they were calling it like bank expenses every month. And after, several attempts of calling and sending emails and going to the bank, they just would not budge. They would not do anything. And so what we did is we turned this into a little infographic and we published it online and tagged all of the bank's branches in Lebanon. And we basically just revealed our statement of accounts and all of the charges that the bank was taking. This is at a period where the US dollar was really soaring in Lebanon. So there was a devaluation of the Lebanese pound. So for the bank to withdraw $307, that was a lot of money for us. And the interesting thing about this is, in fact, the bank called and gave us our money back. And this was just from an Instagram post, and it prompted a lot of people to do the same on social media. In terms of impact, as designers and publishers, we often get to like this kind of like point where we're like, okay, we do like what we do. We feel very strongly waking up every day and going to work and publishing all of this, but how can we, like, are we really creating any impact? How can we tell? How can we measure impact? How do you measure impact as a designer? Like, really, how do you measure impact? It's so hard to do that sometimes. And I don't have an answer for you. In case you're expecting an answer, I don't have an answer for you, but I will share just like one thought process with you. As designers, we're often called upon to perform a service, one whose parameters are quantifiable in terms of form and performance. How will my design fit and what impact will it have? Our focus is on the market, the reach, how many centimeters, clicks, dollars. And they tend to call us problem solvers. But where in the ranks of all known professions is graphic design positioned, like between marketing specialists or architects, or really where in the ranks is graphic design positioned? And why do we get paid so much less than everybody else does in the design industry? Graphic design remains largely excluded from the cultural scene. Exceptionally, when we are working for the cultural sector or for social enterprises, we're given a little bit more space. We're expected to broaden our research, get involved, have a say. The designer as author, as social agent, as activist can be actualized in selected circumstances with those kinds of projects. The kafala system, I can't see the audience, so I can't ask anyone if I can't ask the audience if they know what the kafala system is, but I will tell you what it is. It's often referred to as an issue of modern slavery, and this is a governmentally imposed system in not just Lebanon, but the neighboring Arab countries as well. This is a protest that took place in front of one of the embassies in Beirut during the crisis, while migrant domestic workers were really trying hard to just get repatriated back home because they were not getting paid anymore in Beirut. The living condition had been really horrible by then, and the explosion had leveled a part of the city. Kafala is a system that allows employers to sponsor foreign laborers. At face value, the system doesn't seem bad and sounds like it could be a win-win. Sponsors cover travel and living expenses, and workers are given visas which allow them to work and live in the new country. But beneath the surface, kafala gives employers almost complete control over workers and leaves them with little to no protection. They rarely get Sunday off, so they work from Monday to Sunday. They live in their employers' houses, which means they are working around the clock almost. Most of them have their passports confiscated by their employers for fear of them running away. A lot of them don't get to mingle with friends or make any friends. The time they are given to call their families back home are very, very limited if they're given any phone calls a month. And they get paid, their pay is pretty shit. They get paid way below the minimum wage in the country. These are just some headlines from international news outlets, and this is all new. Like, the kafala system was not making headlines before 2019 around the world, but all of a sudden it is, and documentaries are being produced. At the root of this issue is that kafala gives private citizens and companies, instead of the state, control over migrants' legal statuses. Not that the state would be better, but as a result, sponsors control most aspects of their workers' lives. This includes where they work, if and how they receive their pay and benefits, and even where they can go by holding necessary travel documents. To make matters worse, workers have almost no way of fighting workplace abuses as they are not covered by these countries' labor protections. Our fifth issue was themed migrations. And for migrations, we decided to have two women. We hadn't usually done this before, but we decided to have two women. So what we hadn't done before is have a cover story. So usually we would have somebody on the cover, but it wouldn't be a cover story. It would be almost like a contribution to the magazine. But this was one of the first instances where we did that. There was an in-depth interview in the magazine with two women called Mekda Sielma and Sigereda Brihanu. And we decided to publish their portraits on the cover. This was at the time COVID was happening. So the portraits were taken by Miriam Boulos in Beirut, but it was a Zoom photo shoot. So the pictures were taken off screen. So you can see the texture of the screen a little bit on the images. And we decided to also publish their names in full on the covers. Sigereda and Mekdes are former migrant domestic workers, and they are from Ethiopia. They escaped the system and now are leading members of their communities in Lebanon. They've refused to leave and decided to stay in and do the work there with migrant domestic workers that are currently present and those that are about to enter the country. And most often, their names are too difficult for employers to pronounce. And so Mekdes will be shortened to Maggie, Sigereda will be shortened to Terry, let's say, like a name that is easier for their employers to call them. But rarely do you ever actually know what their full name is unless you see their passport. And so we decided to actually publish their full names on the cover of the magazine. This is the organization that they've started. It's called Enya Lenya. It's a community-based feminist activist organization that is doing a lot of on-ground work. And when we first met them, this was their Instagram account with 964 followers. I'm merely showing this just to say that the very simple act of being designers and deciding to talk about a topic like kafala and publishing it in the magazine, despite its very indirect link to design and visual culture, means that now our network knows about kafala system, and our network now knows about kafala system, and our magazine is distributed around the world. The distribution center is London, and so it is distributed from there. And that means that anybody whose hands the magazine lands into now knows about kafala as well. And so we published an in-depth interview with them both, recounting their journey to Lebanon and out of kafala system. And it was compiled with a photo essay by Miriam Boulos, in which she documented the activities that for some of the migrant domestic workers that get to have a Sunday off, she kind of followed them every Sunday and documented their whereabouts. We also got, certain other platforms and media outlets also posting about the kafala system, and all of a sudden recognizing this as racial justice. This is old, they're far past this, and this is not to say that, publishing them got them to this many followers, but it really is just a simple act of sharing this means that our network gets shared and that network gets shared. And this is all to say, it's to reconsider those times where we're like, this doesn't really have anything to do with design. Why would we talk about this? Or why would we tackle this? No, it does. In fact, it actually really does. And before we knew it, magazines from everywhere were addressing the migrant domestic worker situation in Lebanon and in the region, and addressing kafala and calling it a neo-slavery. These are the first 6 issues that we published. So the first issue we published of Safar is themed Nuruz. The second one is animals. The third one is obsessions. The fourth is nostalgia. The fifth is migrations. The sixth is power. And the seventh is networks. This is the last one that came out, and our 8th is coming out in a couple of months too. Safar's latest and 7th issue examines the sprawling and ubiquitous life of networks of money and the many ways of use, but also networks of food, networks of distribution and consumption, networks of care and mutual support, networks of resistance, and networks of revolt against the complicated webs that continue to divide, enforce binaries, and oppress. This issue highlights how different networks are manifested in the visual realm via drawings, maps, photographs, documents, and renderings. It also aims to engage with the history of radical networks, such as mutual aid, anti-colonial, and transnational feminist formations that may teach us how to mobilize against our present and towards emancipatory futures. This is a magazine on design and visual culture, but yeah, we can do this. We can talk about this if we want to. These are the inside covers, and in fact, the subject of the cover is in the recent years with the economic crisis and the devaluation of the Lebanese pounds, someone that we were encountering every day in Lebanon would be the person who exchanges your money for you. So you'd go to them with a USD if you got a payment in from the outside, and they'd exchange it for you in LBP. And this is like really for the like on an average, like for an average Lebanese person, this is like a daily trip that you make to the exchanger. So this was a woman, and she was, you know, kind of taking on this job and this role. And I'm going to read to you just the small summary on the cover story that my colleagues Maggie Douayi and Sharon Grosso from Safar wrote. The day we shot Adele on the cover in Ihda, North Lebanon, the exchange rate on the black market was over 20 times the official government rate. Hyperinflation is one of the most crippling and visible manifestations of Lebanon's economic crisis over the last 3 years. We aren't kidding when we say everyone and their mother has become a sarraf, a money exchanger. Adele manages the money for her son's restaurant, where they now deal with a daily influx of tens of millions of Lebanese liras. They carry bags of the local currency home, only to exchange them for a handful of dollar bills. Customers pay in lira, but suppliers only accept payments in dollars. So in this case, it's the restaurant's suppliers. Adele found herself exchanging lots of paper money for friends, family, neighbors, customers, and her nickname, Dollar Mama, has stuck ever since. So we shot the Dollar Mama on the cover. I'm just going to take you through a few spreads from networks. In this 7th issue on networks, Safar explores the community building practices and spaces of print collectives from New York to Spain, discusses symbols and short-term safe spaces in Palestine, shares the Black American lineage of resistance through mutual aid, examines the directions in which film distribution and production have historically flowed in Lebanon. Follows the intricate and exhaustive naming process for a one-of-a-kind master's degree program in design, delves into one professor's viral course on Ye, asks questions about cultural funding and the ways money moves, traces the global webs that weave together land, food, consumption, and occupation, and much more.
Safar is a graphic design and visual culture magazine published out of Lebanon in Beirut. This is truly one of the most exciting publications that has launched in recent years. It's definitely a personal favourite of mine. One of the wonderful things about it is it's printed in both Arabic and in English. It's a bilingual magazine, and that kind of really informs the design of the publication, which is consistently exquisite. This issue is themed Power. There's this really spectacular cover that really sets the tone of pictures of a female bodybuilder, and the material inside is just as kind of unexpected and really extraordinary as you would expect from that cover.
We had the publishing itch from the very start. Before Safar was born, Hatem had co-founded Samandal Comics and Hayya Records. There has always been a big gap in writing about regional design and visual culture.
There were conversations to be had and disputes and opinions and discoveries to be made. We started the journal because we wanted to stop and to reflect. The magazine was both an internal field of experimentation and a public interface of our thinking. Through making it, we discovered our voice. We spoke about the urgent topics that were shaping our world: nostalgia, migration, power.
What's also interesting about nostalgia is that we can miss the very things we've hated.
At least this is my circle of communication with my students. I want to preserve as much as I can and give it to somebody else.
So if people tell you this is impossible, you want to do it.
It's such a beautiful thing to be able to combine things that you love and things that where you come from, and put them into something that you're very passionate about.
I'm going to end by quoting the First Things First manifesto. We propose a reversal of priorities in favor of more useful, lasting, and democratic forms of communication, a mind shift away from product marketing and toward the exploration and production of a new kind of meaning. The scope of debate is shrinking. It must expand. Consumerism is running uncontested. It must be challenged by other perspectives expressed in part through the visual languages and resources of design. Thank you.